You don't need a million pedals to get a great post-punk indie guitar sound. And in fact, I think you can do it in just 5 pedals or less. So today we're going to go through the pedals that I've picked out to be on my list and try and get some really great indie sounds. In this video we're mainly going to be focusing on those 80s kind of post-punk indie bands like The Cure, Joy Division, The Smiths, Susie and the Banshees, that kind of thing. But just by making this video we'll probably end up touching on some of the bands that were part of that kind of 2000s post-punk revival as well. Before jumping into each individual effect, let's just have a quick overview of the 5 pedals that I think are essential for this kind of sound. Just a heads up, this isn't an advertisement for you to go out and buy the exact pedals that I've got here. I mean, you can if you like the sound of them, but this is just to show the effects that I would choose, and I'll also talk about some alternatives as well. First up, we're going to go for some sort of overdrive or distortion. Now, we're not looking at alternative rock here, so I don't personally think you need a fuzz. You're not really going to be going that heavy, and I've actually gone for a distortion pedal instead of just like a standard overdrive, because with this thing you can kind of turn the distortion down a bit and it sort of acts as an overdrive. I mean, with a lot of post-punk music you're going to be playing clean quite a lot, so you don't really need that kind of always on overdrive that's just sitting there and kind of breaking up your amp. But anyway, more on that later. The second pedal on this list is going to be a chorus pedal. And in my opinion, if there was one pedal that kind of sums up this era of indie music, I would say it's chorus. It's all over so many of those records, and so I think that is absolutely essential. The third pedal on this list is going to be a delay, and actually specifically some sort of analog delay. Now, I don't think it needs to be necessarily an actual analog delay like this MXR carbon copy here. It can be something that's emulating it. So actually, I went for this TC electronic flashback. Our fourth pedal is going to be a reverb, and for that, we've gone for the trusty Electro Harmonix Holy Grail. And my fifth and final essential pedal for this sound is going to be a tremolo pedal. But anyway, I think it's time to deep dive these pedals, and I'll explain why I've chosen them, and then we'll test them out and hear how great the sounds can be. As I mentioned, I wanted some kind of overdrive or distortion, but I felt like a distortion pedal was going to give you more bang for your buck here, and I didn't think it was necessary to have both in this board. And actually, when I sat down to make this video and research it, I was definitely going to use the Rat pedal, but right before I started playing, I just thought, why don't I use this thing? I did actually make a video on this pedal specifically, which will pop up here if you do want to go and watch that. But basically, Lateral Sound are a company that are really near me here in the southwest of the UK, and they make a small run of like weird pedals that sound really, really awesome. We've actually got 2 of them in my band, this one and the Fuzz Fix, which is just an absolute gnarly animal. But in terms of what this pedal does, you've basically got force, which is like a volume really, and impact, which is kind of your gain knob, but it sort of adds other frequencies in it too, so it does get quite fuzzy if you max it out. But like I said, it's a really good distortion on its own, and if you dial it right back there, you can kind of get some overdrive sounds. They're not necessarily transparent, but they're not like overpowering, if you get me. So the reason that a distortion pedal is on this list, I think, is mainly due to bands like Gang of Four, The Birthday Party and Magazine. They use some really gnarly distortion sounds. Like I mentioned before, they're not fuzzy and heavy, they just kind of cut through the mix really well. And I think to demonstrate this, a song within this genre that has kind of both these things, sort of like an overdrivey sound guitar and then a lead heavier line, is Shot by Both Sides by Magazine. I think it just has those chords playing in sort of an overdrive style and then that kind of cool lead that goes over the top. I think this is a really great song. So I've done a little bit of a rip here of it, using just this pedal. For the rhythm, I had this dial right back, and then for the lead, I turned it up. What a cool song that is, and actually I hadn't really explored Magazine that much and I feel a bit bad for it. But in terms of other options, if you can't get your hands on one of these, I would say you can go for any of those big pedal companies' distortion pedals like Boss DS1 or the Rat or the MXR ones, or actually a pedal that I used to have that I see still gets a lot of love, and I don't really know why I sold it because it's really cheap, is the Boss Blues Driver. I reckon that you could probably get this sound with that thing, because that could do kind of overdrivey stuff, but then could actually go a bit heavier. For the first few years of being in my band, that was basically my only distortion pedal. I never had a fuzz pedal, and I still think it sounded great. But moving on to my second essential pedal for post-punk and indie is chorus. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if there was one pedal that summed up this era of post-punk indie, I would say it's chorus. It's on so many post-punk records, and sometimes, even if it's not on the guitar, it's on another instrument like the bass or the keyboards or something. And again, I've gone with the Neo Clone. I love this pedal, I've used it a lot on this channel, and I think it's deserved because it's really, really awesome. I think the reason chorus is used so much in this genre is it gives that kind of washy, dreamy vibe, but when you play it with minor stuff, it can actually sound quite dark as well. And obviously moving into the 90s, the big grunge bands like Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins and Soundgarden all used some sort of chorus. I think one of the reasons that it sounds so different in the 80s to the 90s is the use of the chorus with a lot of reverb as well. A lot of Billy Corgan and Kurt Cobain's guitar sound was quite dry in terms of it didn't have like a big washy reverb on it. Whereas bands like Echo and the Bunnymen, the Smiths, The Cure, you know, all those kind of bands were using it with a lot of reverb. And so to demonstrate the sounds for this, I think I'm going to wait until we put the chorus on as well. But quickly before we move on, I just want to talk about a couple of alternatives. And there's actually one that I keep seeing that I wouldn't mind trying. It's the June 60 by TC Electronic. In the studio here with me, I've actually got a Roland Juno 6, and the chorus on that keyboard is absolutely phenomenal. And listening to demos, I think they've got it pretty close to that, so I would love to try that chorus pedal. But let's move on to the third pedal on this list, and it's going to be delay. I think delay is super important in the post-punk genre. And I actually did a video breaking down the style of playing in post-punk and how you can basically take some of those ideas and put it in your own music, which you can watch here. But I talked at the end about the Memory Man and how the sound of that pedal in my mind kind of sums up that era. And I think it's actually because it was like an analog delay pedal. It wasn't perfectly replicating the sound of the guitar, and it had its own like vibe. And like I mentioned at the beginning, you could go with something like this, the MXR Carbon Copy. They're a really good pedal, but they don't do a whole lot for the amount of money they are. And so I wanted to give this thing a go. And actually, I was recording an album in the studio recently, and we kept coming back to this delay instead of my normal DD7. So I thought it was a good opportunity to get it in a video. It's got a bunch of different settings, but in terms of this video, I think the one that's most important is the tape setting. And here at the top, you've got this switch that switches between 3 different patterns of notes. And I think in my limited knowledge of what these symbols mean, it's actually a quarter, an eighth note, and then maybe like a dotted pattern as well. And I think within post-punk, you have a couple of different styles of delay. In terms of slapback delay, I think you hear that a lot in bands like Joy Division. They're not really long repeating notes like you'd hear the Edge play in U2. It's just kind of that slapbacky feel that just sounds so cool. I think you also hear it loads in the Birthday Party too. And at times it can actually sound a little bit psychedelic. But here I've decided to play a little version of Disorder and basically use a short slapback delay like what I think I hear on the record. And then in terms of the other delay style I hear a lot in this music, it is that kind of longer delay pattern, like I mentioned with the Edge. But actually, when I messed around with this, I kept hearing Interpol, and I know they weren't an 80s band, but I think they took a lot of inspiration from this era, and so the part I've played here just sounds really Interpol to me. So now moving on to our fourth pedal on this list, it's gonna be reverb. And before, when I said chorus is probably the most important thing, I probably should have mentioned that it's chorus with a reverb on. And in terms of what I've gone for the reverb, it's the Electro Harmonix Holy Grail. This thing is a great pedal. I think it was just over £100 when I last looked, but it gives really great sounds. And I think I mentioned this in the other video I made about post-punk. We're not looking at like shoegaze here, where we need those absolutely huge reverb sounds. We just need something that can either do like spring reverbs or some sort of mid-decay hall setting. You want enough for it to be heard that there's a reverb there, but you don't want to absolutely swamp your guitar sound like you would do in shoegaze. And that's why I think this thing's really perfect for that. You basically just set it on which setting you like, then turn up the amount of reverb that you want up and down. One of my favourite bands who maybe straddles this genre and that shoegaze kind of era is Cocteau Twins. I think they use reverb so amazingly, combined with chorus as well, and it just sounds so cool. But I think perhaps they straddle too much over to that dream pop shoegaze sound to feature in this video. And so actually I'm going to take something in the style of a guitarist we've already featured in this video in the Magazine song, and I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, but it's John McGeoch. He also played on Spellbound by Susie and the Banshees, and I think from the intro to that track you'll see that Johnny Marr was really influenced by his guitar playing. But anyway, we're talking about pedals, so I'm going to put these two pedals on in that kind of style, and I think it's going to sound great. In terms of alternatives to the Holy Grail, I've heard a lot of people talk about the Hall of Fame reverb. That looks to be really good too. I've also got the Strymon Blue Sky on my board. Obviously it's a bit expensive, but it is a really good pedal. And at the same time, I don't think you can go wrong with the Boss RV6 too. But anyway, let's move on to my fifth and final essential post-punk indie pedal. And it's gonna be a tremolo pedal. Now I think it could have actually been another pedal as well here. I was basically torn between a tremolo and a flanger pedal. I think there was a lot of bands in this era who were using flanger in quite tasteful ways that were really sitting in the music well. But in the end, I found it kind of hard to look past a tremolo pedal. Echo and the Bunnymen, who are one of my favourite bands from this era, use tremolo all over Bring on the Dancing Horses, and I think it sounds really cool. I know Ocean Rain's probably their best work, but I still have a real soft spot for that song. I think it's amazing. But there's one song within this genre that I think sums up the tremolo pedal more than anything else, and that is the Smiths' How Soon As Now. I mean, that tremolo guitar at the beginning is just so cool. It really is just absolutely timelessly cool, the sound of that guitar in that song. And the tremolo I've used today is this Boss TR2. Again, it's not actually mine. I've got a different tremolo too, but this one's just that little bit more versatile because you can change the shape of the waveform. And then you've basically just got a rate and a depth on it too. And combining that with the chorus and the reverb in front of it, I think you can get pretty close to Johnny Marr's sound on that song. This is how it sounds just playing that opening chord. But I do have a little confession. I obviously have to play to like Logic Drummer, and so I need to play to a click track and keep it in time with that. Now either I've not done enough research or this doesn't have a tap tempo on it. And so whilst trying to make this video, I've been like turning up and down the rate here, really small amounts to see if I could get it bang on time. But if I'm honest, it was just taking way too long. So what I've done instead is use a Logic plugin and then just synced it up with the time of the track. Now obviously this isn't really going to be a problem when you're playing at home or with a band, because you can kind of sync it up to the band and it doesn't need to be as exact. But when I wanted to have the guitars left and right to really fill out this sound, I felt like it just needed to be absolutely bang on. Apparently when Johnny Marr did this, he used the tremolo from his Fender and then went into a different amp with a slightly different tremolo too. But if I'm honest, this sounds pretty good, I think, just using that stock Logic plugin. It's still got the chorus and the reverb on it, and I basically tried to match the sound of this thing as close as possible, and this is what we've got. In terms of alternatives to tremolos, in my opinion, that thing sounded really good just using that plugin, so I don't think it's going to be like a million miles off no matter what you get. I'm sure as long as you can change the waves on it a little bit, you can get similar sounds. Kieran, the other guitarist in my band, has the Strymon Flint, which is actually a really cool pedal because it does a few different sounds of tremolos and it's got a reverb on it as well. So I guess it's probably a good pedal saver too. Personally, I would probably just go for this thing here. But like I mentioned before, I could have probably swapped out the tremolo for a flanger pedal, and actually I wonder if both of those are kind of surplus to your needs anyway, and they might just be luxuries. Like I reckon you'd probably get some really great sounds from the other 4 pedals and never even really need either a tremolo or a flanger. But what pedals do you think I've missed out on this list? And actually, if there's some alternatives to the ones I've mentioned here that you think would be helpful to other people, drop a comment down below. But it is that time again. Please let me know your thoughts and then watch this video here next. And until next time, keep on making noises.